started, can you raise your hand if you were at the last, when I was here in May, at those presentations, if you were at all of them? Okay, were you at bribing? Bribing and baiting, scheduling, and what was he targeting was kind of one of the focuses of one of the others. Who all was it targeting? I'm sorry, just raise your hand. You can't remember? Well, maybe that's a good sign that I don't have to worry about being redundant. Because, so normally when I give a kind of a training 101 or an introduction to training, it spans about 4 or 5 hours, and we didn't have that block of time last time, so I got creative and retooled some of the presentations. So I was trying to get, again, creative and not have too much redundancy for this one, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be repeat visitors or new people. So if you're yawning, please just go ahead and like give me a big long yawn, like, oh God, we've heard this so many times, Margaret, shut up and move on. And we'll try to do some different things. If it continues to be interesting, or I've got a bunch of slides that I just did, but I may ask you, do y'all remember seeing this video? Do you want to see it again? Because we're talking about some of the same concepts, but maybe with a little bit different slant to them. We all learn through repetition, so I think hearing things multiple times is good, particularly if you're at different places in your experiences with training. So when you're just starting out, it's all, oh my gosh, so many words and, so many new concepts, and then you start to apply them, and the definitions take on a little bit different or more practical meaning for you than they did when you're just flat out memorizing them. So depending on where you are in your experiences, you may take away something different from the exact same discussion. So I hope it's not too redundant, and if it is, truly, like, yawn, do something, like, we're dying here, Margaret, this is awful. I'm okay with that. Let me know that's information that we all need as we're planning and going forward with these sorts of presentations. So here's what we're hoping to accomplish. And this particular Training 101 is going to span today and tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about one specific technique, which I'll just gloss over today because we have an hour to talk about it on Thursday. Okay, so I'm hoping that when most of you think of animal training, am I in your way? Can you say go? When most of you think about animal training, this isn't immediately what comes to mind. We've come very far since the beginnings of animal training, and many of the techniques and tools that we use were developed by teaching animals to do presentation or show or entertainment type behaviors. But of course now we've really moved towards working animals for husbandry and veterinary care, trying to specifically enhance and address their welfare. So this is really the focus of what we're doing, is talking about how do we use positive reinforcement training to enhance an animal's welfare, their care, and their life in captivity. So what is training? I always like to ask this question. If you've seen this slide before, you probably know the answers. So if you're answering due to regurgitation, then maybe hold off. And if somebody hasn't been to one of these presentations, I would be interested to hear what you think training is. This is interactive. Yes?
It's teaching.
Have you been before? Yeah, certainly, I think we go into it with, I'm going to teach the animal to do behavior X. But really training is so much more than that. Training is communication, and it's not just me communicating to the animal what I want that animal to do. It's about me listening and receiving communication back from the animal. So it's very much a two-way dynamic interaction that you're having with this animal. I mean, these animals are experiencing all kinds of things that nature did not design them to experience, and we're asking them to do crazy things that are so outside the scope of what they evolved to do. So we really need to be attentive to their feelings, their wants, their needs, their fears, all of these things, how they're progressing. Are they frustrated with the training, or are they super jazzed and excited and loving it and loving learning? Of course, we hope they're loving learning. That's part of what we want to do. But part of being a good trainer is understanding not only that individual animal and the circumstances that are surrounding the situation, but certainly knowing the animal's natural history and behavioral biology, the individual nuances of the animal that you're working right there in that moment with. And being open to, maybe the animal's seen this a million times, but they're still afraid of it. How do I, as the trainer, listen to what this animal's saying and take responsibility to help them overcome that fear? And so that's why I say it's a two-way communication. And certainly the foundation of positive reinforcement training is trust. We're going to do things that hurt the animals. We're going to poke needles in them. You know, we're going to inject things that might burn. We're going to do things that make them uncomfortable, cause some pain, cause some fear, cause some anxiety. But if we have a really good, strong foundation, not only of learning with the animal, but of trust, then when we do those minor things that hurt, scare, frighten, whatever them, then you know we've got a good starting place because we've built this strong foundation, not only of learning theory with the animals, but also just something that's based in trust. And we're not going to hurt you most of the time. If we do, we'll give you something really spectacular for it to make it worth your while. Okay, so we teach animals in training. We teach them to do some basic things, and from this, everything else evolves. We teach them to make a movement, such as come to the cage front or let us enter their space and approach them. And I will say, for animals that we work in with, I think that we have to really, just because we can doesn't always mean we should. We tend to go in with small animals that maybe we perceive as less dangerous, or it's easier just to go in with them. But it's easier for us, and I think that we have to consider that experience for the animal, because this is the only space they have. And now we're stepping into it and intruding upon their space to have them come and do something that might be scary, painful, whatever. So just because we can doesn't always mean we should. And I think it's something that's good to keep in the back of your mind. And one of the best learning examples of this that I ever had in my career, I was talking with a friend of mine who was training bush dogs, these little guys like this, and they were trying to train them to measure their sexual swelling, and I think they were measuring like the male's testicles as they were developing. So they wanted to lean the animals they wanted to have the animals stand there and put these calipers on them. Woo! That's a little, hello. These are little dogs, these little bush dogs, they could go in with them and work with them. They weren't going to get eviscerated by these animals. But my friend was like, God, they're just so afraid. We can't get them over this hump. And kind of listening, said, well, why don't you just teach them to lean in or put them in a corner and then just measure them from the outside. They had it instantly. All they had to do was step out of the animal space because those animals were so uncomfortable with the person being in there. So I got off on a diatribe, as I sometimes do, but to me it's just a good thing to remember. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So anyway, we want them to make a movement. We might want animals to hold a position. This one's real cute. The dog's real cute. That's somebody who runs a doggy daycare, and she converted a school bus to the bark and ride. Tried to put in some different pictures, so those of you that have seen this before don't have to see the same pictures. All right, so moving is super important, but holding still or steady or staying is also critical, particularly for all the veterinary kinds of behaviors that we want to do. We can't take a blood sample if an animal's moving around. We're not willing to hold for a minute or 30 seconds. Okay, certainly we need them to tolerate a variety of stimuli. It might be something like entering a scary crate. So in this case, for the vulture, we start with half a crate. Take the top off, learn to walk into the crate. Gradually we put the top back on and the animal, boom, is in the crate magically. We might want to take a blood sample from an animal. We need them to tolerate the feeling of the needle, not only piercing the skin, piercing the vessel, perhaps being moved around and staying for some period of time while enough blood is drawn. So these are, very painful, scary things for the animals that they have to learn to tolerate. We need them to discriminate a variety of stimuli, and this is from the training perspective, if we ask an animal to sit and stay, we want them to sit and stay and not spin circles and stand up until they finally get to the sit and stay. You know, we would like for them to do the behavior that we've asked them to do in a relatively short amount of time without running through 30 other behaviors they might have been reinforced for doing. Okay, one really important thing, we were talking about this actually just a little bit ago with the bears, because bears are really high energy animals, the otters are high energy animals. You have some of these animals that just work at a really exaggerated level of energy and enthusiasm. Sometimes it's really important to reinforce, just be calm, relax a little bit. Take some time between behaviors. Instead of always working animals super fast, one behavior to the next, give them a little breathing time. This elephant in particular, she was an ex-circus elephant, very, very aggressive elephant, didn't like to be touched by people. So we're just working on a second, there's somebody standing right here providing food, while the second person simply approaches, closes in, gets proximity, begins to lift her hand up, and each and every one of these steps are actually bridged. If I would turn it up so you can hear. So this animal, when we started working with her, if you even began to approach her, she would spin and start throwing things at you. So, you know, obviously we don't want an animal behaving aggressive, and we can even train and reinforce calm, relaxed behavior. So in this case, this is beginning to train this bear for a side presentation by introducing a hip target to him, and you'll see his response. The hip target. Hip target. He's sucking raisins. He's still willing to take raisins and continues on with the training. But you can see he's not particularly calm and relaxed as that second target is introduced. So that's something that we have to do, is begin to teach him to be calm and patient and tolerant as that second target is put into his hip. If we can't get it in and touch him, we can't use it as a tool to bring his hip up to the side of the cage. So we have to teach him to be calm and relaxed while the scary thing goes in towards him in order to be able to use it as a tool. And I put that in even before we were working with the bears. All right, so is everybody marginally familiar with the definition of operant conditioning? Do you feel comfortable discussing it? If I were to say, what are the components of operant conditioning? Could you answer that question? There's 3 or 4 of them. There's reinforcement, there's punishment, there's extinction, and if you want to break it down, there's negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Okay, so reinforcement is anything that increases the chance of a behavior recurring. Punishment is anything that decreases the chance of a behavior recurring. So the foundation of operant conditioning is you do something and there's a consequence associated with what you do. You choose to either repeat what you did or not repeat what you did based on those consequences. Right? So can anyone give an example of either reinforcement or punishment? It can be a human example. What's something that you might do every day and be reinforced or punished for doing?
Putting on your seatbelt and it starts digging at you, you know, put your seatbelt on.
And what's that an example?
No, reinforcement.
The objective is to get you to buckle your seatbelt.
Yeah.
So you're increasing the chance of that behavior recurring. And you do it to, you buckle your seatbelt, why?
To avoid
To make that damn
that
sound.
noise.
Damn sound! Yes, that is exactly correct. Thank you for that answer.
Yay!
Yep, so, and it's punishment and negative reinforcement are often confused because we both think negative reinforcement, punishment, bad. They must make things stop. But no, negative reinforcement increases the chance of a behavior recurring. Punishment decreases the chance. So in the world of operant conditioning, there is some sort of stimulus that causes some sort of behavior to happen, and then either reinforcement or punishment occurs to either make the behavior repeat or not repeat. So stimulus, response, reinforcement, punishment. That's essentially how it works. Okay, and then from a training, kind of formal training perspective, we give a stimulus that we call a cue or an SD or a command. We ask the animal to do something, enter the crate. The animal does the behavior, the response, enters the crate, gets reinforced, hopefully positive reinforcement. And when we can ask the animal, get in your crate, and the animal gets in the crate 90% of the time, barring some extraordinary circumstances, then we say that behavior is under stimulus control. So when we can give the cue and the animal responds appropriately without significant latency, time between when you ask them to do it and when they actually perform the behavior, if they do that, most 90% of the time, then we say that behavior is under stimulus control or a trained behavior or an established behavior. So when, as we're sort of organizing some of the training programs throughout the zoo, we might make lists of established behaviors, so ones that the animals will reliably perform for any trainer that's been properly trained to ask for that behavior, then it's under stimulus control. I usually say is it an established behavior, but it's the same thing. Okay, so again, two types of reinforcement. We have positive reinforcement, which is following a behavior or an act with something the subject wants, therefore they repeat the behavior again. So can you flip your example into a positive reinforcement? Or can anyone else? Perfect. Instead of buckling your seatbelt to avoid the bang, bang, bang buzzer, if you buckled your seatbelt and your favorite candy came rolling out, woohoo! I'd be buckling my seatbelt all the time. Yeah, perfect. See? That's how it works. Thank you, Adam, for the positive reinforcers, by the way. He is totally responsible for them. If you don't like the choices,
They're great choices.
they are. I may have had a few chocolate eggs at this point. It was an unopened bag until I got my hands on it. All right, so the positive reinforcers, the things that we use, most often we're using food or maybe juice or some kind of liquid that the animal likes, but we can certainly use things like toys or going to a favorite area or play or social interaction. There's all sorts of reinforcers that we can use, and the more types of reinforcers we have available to us, the more prepared we are for any situation that is presented. If the animal's sick, they don't really feel like working for food, maybe we have some other types of reinforcers that we can use. Who likes Jelly Bellies? Some of them are twinsies.
Yeah, a lot of
They're
our
belly
cookies.
wraps.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's really a better deal
Yes.
to buy those. Would you raise your pen very nice and high? Thank you. Put it back down. Thank you. How many of these do you like? Oh. Good job. Excellent. Oh, very well done. So good. Quick, run to the store and get more. Okay, do something, get something you like for it. Hopefully come away smiling. Hey, of course, as we've already been discussing a little bit, there's also negative reinforcement, which does increase the chance of a behavior recurring, but it does so by a very different technique. Negative reinforcement training is also called escape or avoidance training. Because you present a stimulus that the animal wants to avoid, and they escape or avoid that aversive stimulus and therefore do the behavior. You buckle your seatbelt, you avoid hearing the annoying buzzer, you've increased your chance of buckling the seatbelt because you know that if you don't, the buzzers might even increase. I love the cars that when you get in, they go ding, 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 and then you don't buckle and it starts going ding, 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 ding. Like, oh. That's a great example of negative reinforcement and how you have to increase the negative reinforcer. So the important part about negative reinforcement is the two examples here. The elephant lifting the foot, the hook of or the point of the hook here. My pointer works on this screen. Right there, straight down. The point of the hook, if the elephant, when she's initially trained, maybe she's poked and prodded in the back of her foot, she lifts her foot to escape the feeling of that ankus or bull hook or whatever you want to call it. Now all I have to do is say foot and present it, or even just have it hanging on my belt, and the elephant lifts her foot up because she knows if she doesn't, that dinger's going to start dinging louder, the point's going to come out and touch the back of her leg. But the important part of negative reinforcement is you truly do give the animal the opportunity to comply with the behavior by escaping the aversive stimulus. The moment the foot's lifted, she no longer has the threat of that point on the back of her leg. Squeeze cage for a monkey. I want the monkey to come forward. I just reach up and grab the squeeze cage mechanism. Perhaps this monkey's been squeezed many times before, so merely the threat of reaching up to pull the squeeze cage brings him forward because he doesn't want to be forced by that moving wall. So that's still negative reinforcement. Another excellent example is the hose. If animals have been hosed from one place to another, they don't like the hose, you want them to move from cage A to cage B, so you just go touch the hose on the back of the wall, boom, they run. Because they know if they don't do it, you're bringing the hose out. Okay, so the threat of the negative reinforcer is often even powerful enough to cause a behavioral response. This is a super loud video. Let me turn that before I start. Okay, I'm not sure if I've shown you this video. I don't have a whole lot of videos of negative reinforcement, so I know the one I showed last time I didn't put in this time. So if you've seen this before and you automatically know the answer, just let the folks that maybe haven't seen it think about it. But see if you can figure out what the negative reinforcer is and what the desired behavior is from watching the video. It's fairly obvious.
Behaviors to crave or shift.
Yeah, so the behavior is everybody run in the little tunnel, and the negative reinforcer for the guy who was the holdout in the end is she steps in and she's actually waving a net, which you can't see, and he's running away from the net. So, oh, actually this one is, believe it or not, this is actually after training, positive reinforcement training, and she didn't have to wave the net. So, one of the things that's always obvious when I watch this video is for those of you that have crate trained an animal with positive reinforcement, do they move into the crate like this? Now, have you watched like circus animals or performing animals and how quickly, I mean, they're like bam, 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 bam. They move so fast and almost to me in like a natural kind of herky-jerky way. And to me, that is a huge sign of negative reinforcement. You just don't see animals that are trained with positive reinforcement moving in these herky-jerky kind of unnatural ways. At least I don't. And so, like, one of the things that I will often be asked to do is review a video of training for, you know, some animal protection group or something who's wanting to illustrate how, you know, a circus animal's being mishandled or something like that. And one of the things that you can always point out is the way that these animals move. They move in such an unnatural way because they're trying to escape or avoid something. And it's very, I mean, you can work animals fast in positive reinforcement, but they just don't move like this. It's one of those things that I think isn't always noticed, but when you become aware of it, then you really start noticing it a lot. I don't know if any, you guys have noticed that as well, but to me it seems very obvious. Okay, so good job on that. Anybody want to volunteer for this demo? I would suggest that a similar situation is maybe what animals are experiencing. Negative reinforcement absolutely works. It typically works faster than positive reinforcement. We don't have to take all those painstaking little steps and teach the animal to trust us and cooperate like we do with positive reinforcement. So yeah, it happens fast. I consult well, I haven't in the last couple of years, but I used to consult a lot in biomedical labs, and when you're talking thousands of animals that have to be trained to give a blood sample or shift into a little squeeze gauge so that some pretty aversive, frightening things can be done to them, they rely a lot on negative reinforcement, and absolutely it works. Positive reinforcement takes time, but I hope it's very obvious to all of us here that positive reinforcement is so much better for an animal's welfare. It gives them choice, it gives them control, it empowers them to make decisions and learn and think, and all of those things that negative reinforcement really strips away from them. So I think that hopefully again it's just obvious to all of you why positive reinforcement should be our first choice for routine animal management and husbandry training. But if anybody has any questions, I'm not saying that negative reinforcement is always abusive, but the animal does always have to dislike that stimulus in order to want to avoid it. And, with a lot of, again, elephant people are real pain, right? I have been accused of being one, so I can say that. But a lot of the traditional elephant trainers or big cat trainers will say, well, but I don't have to use the hook, or I don't have to use the whip. Well, you've got it hanging on your belt. All you have to do is touch it and the animal reacts. They know that's using it. Having it is using it. So, if you just have to touch the hose on the wall to make the tiger shift from A to B, or the lion maybe, from A to B, you're using it. You're still using that negative reinforcement. The animal is avoiding something it doesn't like. So, anyway, I think we had some discussion about negative reinforcement either in May or maybe the previous time I was here. I'm always happy to discuss it. If anybody has any questions or comments or experiences with it where you felt like it was just as good of a choice as positive reinforcement. One of the things I didn't say this in the beginning, one of the things I love about animal training, I've been doing it a long time, but there's always more to learn. So I always learn a lot from you asking questions or raising discussion points. I feel like I'm never done learning. So if anybody has any, if you disagree with me on anything, please feel free to bring that up, because I think it's good for everybody to talk about all the different ideas that are out there.
I'm just wondering what this is. Like when I used to work dairy, when the cows were done getting milked, we would kind of follow them out and clap and tap on them and stuff, and yell and go outside, go outside, and they would kind of all shuffle in and run out of the barn. Is that negative reinforcement? Because we're not necessarily nobody's really afraid. They're just getting away from us, pushing them out. Is that? I don't know. Is that
what are you
them
thinking
being
now?
Afraid, or is that them being uncomfortable?
All of the above, maybe. Maybe they're not super afraid, but in any case, they want to escape your clapping and screaming or, yelling at them. They don't want a predator, you're a predator at that point, moving in behind them. You know, that's very natural for them to run away from something that's moving in behind them. So absolutely. And it's, I mean, it's a fairly benign negative reinforcer. But again, in most production industry, there's not a lot of positive reinforcement going on. People don't take the time to teach the cattle to what would happen if you shook a bucket of grain or something that they liked and they followed that. That would be more positive experience for them because then they're moving towards something they like rather than away from something they want to avoid, even if it's not causing panic.
Oh yeah, like we don't have time to target train each cow to go outside or something
Right,
like that.
right. But you can also reinforce groups for moving together. We talk about that when we talk about socialization training. But yeah, that's a great example. Okay, so punishment. Remember, we want to decrease the chance of a behavior recurring with punishment. So we use punishment to decrease or eliminate undesirable behaviors. Punishment is delivered after the animal's already done the behavior, so they really don't even have any chance to change what they're doing. All they learn is that they failed. And really nobody likes to hear, no, you were wrong, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, at least with negative reinforcement, you're avoiding something you dislike, but eventually you get to the good thing and you can avoid the aversive stimulus. With punishment, again, it's just no, you were wrong. There's no information about how to do it right. If you're a good negative reinforcement trainer, you're providing information to that animal so they can succeed in the end. And of course, when we're trying to form trusting relationships, we really never want to use physical punishment. I'm not talking about when an animal is attacking your coworker, nothing like that. I'm talking about routine animal management. We're not going to use physical punishment because it would certainly erode the trust we're working so hard to achieve. Amber? You want to volunteer yet?
Sure.
No, I'm kidding. I don't really do a punishment demo.
I'm just a glutton for it.
Can you read this? Anybody want to volunteer for the demo? Guys? All right, gotta have a little humor in there, right? Okay, so, there is a lot of literature out there to support all the negative consequences that are associated with punishment training, and these are just some of them, things like increased aggression, increased fearful behaviors, hiding, introversion, things like that. So there's lots and lots of evidence that further supports, if common sense doesn't tell you, that punishment training is not good for animals, and ultimately not good for the people working with them. Okay, so operant conditioning, in a nutshell. Positive reinforcement increases the chance of a behavior recurring. Negative reinforcement increases the chance of a behavior recurring. And of course, punishment decreases the chance of a behavior recurring. And it can be a little bit of a slippery slope, a slippery, muddy slope between negative reinforcement and punishment. And it's very understandable why people get easily confused. If you think about it though, and how you're applying the tools, if I'm an animal and I'm supposed to move from here to there, and you spray me with water, and I don't like water, in a sense, you're saying, no, 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 don't be here. So then I move over here to escape the water. So you're almost punishing state A in order to negatively reinforce state B. So it is understandable why you would get confused, but think about what the end result is. And I think this is important when we start to talk about dealing with undesirable behavior, which we'll do tomorrow, and how we choose, which technique to best address an undesirable behavior, to eliminate a behavior. And punishment is one of our choices. Okay, so I just sort of throw that out for your thoughts for tomorrow. Okay, so remember that punishers and reinforcers are relative, not absolute. What one animal likes, another may not like. An individual's tastes or likes and dislikes may change from day to day. So it's kind of nice if you have a host of reinforcers, positive reinforcers I'm talking about, that you can use for an animal. Maybe give them some choice. Today I want to work for apples and carrots. Tomorrow I want to work for snap peas and jelly beans. I don't know. So know what they like, and if you need to do a little bit of experimenting, you might use, we were just with the bears beginning to use more healthy options for them and save the super special treats for new behaviors or difficult behaviors, things like that. But take a look at their regular diet. There's no reason to add all kinds of sugary, artificial foods to an animal's diet for training. If they have preferred items within their diet, take a look at that and see what you can use. And then you're keeping the animals physically healthier as well. I mean, some animals work for their regular diet. Marine mammals, carnivores are often working for a portion of their regular diet. But more like with some of the herbivores, we may use extra treat things where we can. So I would recommend trying to use some of their regular diet at least. And if you need to experiment, look at preferences, see what they choose first. And it may change on a given day, especially with somebody like a chimp or, somebody who has a pretty developed sense of taste and maybe perception of their world and everything that's in front of them. Okay, so, dolphins, some animals love to play in the water hose. In my experience, giraffe, you can take a tiny little squirt of water and they'll go running. They really dislike being sprayed with water. So know what they like, know what they dislike, use them for good, not evil. Okay, many of you have seen this slide before. When does training occur? Always, yes, training occurs all the time. Anytime we interact with an animal, there is some sort of communication, there is some sort of teaching and learning happening. Of course, we have our formal training sessions where we go out to do a particular behavior or training a particular behavior, but anytime an animal interacts with you, they're taking away some sort of information. So given that training happens all the time, who trains? Everybody, yes. Everybody trains. So because of that, because training always happens, it behooves you, I guess, to have a plan. What are you going to do when the animal reacts A, B, C, or D? If you walk in the morning and the animal rushes at the cage front in an aggressive way and, spits water on you or jumps up and, charges you, what's your reaction? Your reaction could be reinforcing that behavior that you probably really don't want. So I think it's important that we, as people who are interacting and caring for the animals every single day, look at our behavior, look at the animal's behavior, look at the interaction between the two, our behavior and the animal's behavior, and see how we can, if we need to, modify what we're doing to improve the animal's behavior, even outside the scope of a formal training session. And then on the flip side of that, because training always happens, we have to be really cognizant of not only the individual animal we're trying to work with, but perhaps the others in the group as well. This example, she's actually an excellent trainer, so I can pick on her a little bit. She was training the chimpanzee on the bottom. There's one hanging on the top, mouth open, and then one that's right up facing, and she's doing toothbrush behavior. I don't know if you can see that. So the other one comes swirling down the cage. Opportunistic? You're here, you've got your mouth gaping open, I'll take the opportunity to do a little toothbrush descents with you. Good idea, bad idea? Who says good idea? Everybody. Who says bad idea? Everybody. Why?
Because it's training that animal that it's okay to interrupt the other one's session.
Yeah, exactly. Now it so happens these two chimps are quite oh gosh, darn it. I get distracted, I'm looking at the clock. I should never do that. Bandit little critter. Where's my real? She's like, we're calling it a chimp.
Frustration.
Poo thrown at me if I don't get quick enough.
There's a wizard in that lot.
No, I chose wisely.
Anyway, it happens these two individuals are quite compatible and they don't necessarily displace each other, but absolutely you've got to think about what you're doing. Oh, you're here. training with you since you showed up and doesn't really seem like she wants to do anything anyways. You don't really know what's happening between those two animals. It could be displacement. The one who came up has just displaced the other, and now the other's going to be less likely to come up next time because they got pushed out of the way. So you always want to think about those things and have a plan. I mean, so much of training is about making a good plan and kind of knowing where you're going to go. What are my objectives? I mean, we have the tiers here at Oakland, which is really nice because we sort of have it laid out. Here's the sets of behaviors that we need to train. But at some point, you may need to go beyond the scope of the tiers. Maybe there's a particular problem you need to deal with, or a situation with an animal change, like with the lemur. You know, we're going to train her to do one thing, but now the situation's changed, so maybe we need to quickly switch the plan and train her for something else. So kind of wrap your head around a broader plan. Know what your short-term goals are, your longer-term goals. Make a plan for training individual behaviors. And your individual session, when you go into a single session, you want to make sure that you've kind of got in your head what the objectives are. And if you're working with a group of trainers, it's even more important that the group of you make a plan for each session, so that, you know, if something doesn't go quite as planned, then you're better prepared to deal with it. I mean, it rarely goes as planned in my experience. There's always going to be something that's a little tweaky. All right, so implementing positive reinforcement training. There are several key tools that you want to have. You want to have primary reinforcers, you want to have a conditioned reinforcer, and you want to have targets of varying types and sizes and lengths. And of course, keeping safety in mind, because anytime we're interacting closely with an animal, there is risk to the animal and to us. So we want to make sure that we've planned for all of these things and thought through the tools that we'll be using. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this unless somebody says slow down. I'll just go at a medium pace. In case somebody says slow down or speed up, that's what I need to know. But primary reinforcers, you know, typically we're using food or juice. Primary reinforcers include things that satisfy a biological need. Food, water, sex, shelter. You know, these are things that you don't just want, you need these things. So they satisfy a biological need. There is no learning required to want these things. Secondary reinforcers, on the other hand, are things that an individual likes, but they don't necessarily satisfy that biological need. And there may be some learning that needs to occur for an animal to like it. And this can include things like grooming, scratching, brushing, playing with a particular toy, going to a location, interacting with an individual. All of those things would be included in secondary reinforcers. And a special type of secondary reinforcer that we use is called a conditioned reinforcer, and this is your clicker or your whistle. Hopefully you're using a mechanical one. You can also use the word good or any other word. But essentially what you do is take this sound and pair it with primary reinforcement. So you make the sound, give the food. Make the sound, give the food. Make the sound, give the food. Eventually the animal hears the sound and expects that food or some sort of primary reinforcer is coming. So you have conditioned this otherwise meaningless stimulus or sound or sight or whatever it might be with the primary reinforcer, therefore it gains reinforcement value. This is the Office video. Is there anyone who has not seen it? Anybody who wants to see it again if you have seen it?
Damn, what's in my file? I have to reboot again. Anyway, do you want an Altoid? What do you think?
In school, we learned about this scientist who trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell by feeding them whenever a bell rang. So over the past couple of weeks, I've been conducting a similar
So
experiment.
Pavlov's dog, perhaps you've heard of that.
What? One Altoid. Okay. Altoid? Sure. Pinch bite?
really watch the show, but I love this video clip, and particularly that they added in the, now taste of that all of a sudden, that's the salivating, the dog, the response to hearing the sound and taking the Altoid. Anyway, so that's exactly what we do with the whistle or the clicker or the word good. Some people call it charging the bridge. Oh, I should say it's called a bridge because it bridges the time span between when the animal does the correct behavior and when you can deliver that primary reinforcer. So, think of a dolphin going out to do a jump on a ball. You send the animal out, they jump. The point of the behavior that you want to say, good, yes, you did it perfect, is when the animal jumps up and touches the ball. It's quite difficult to drop a bit of fish in their mouth at that exact moment. So you use the whistle or the clicker to say, good, at that moment, you did something right. Then they come back and get the primary reinforcer. So this tool tells the animal they did something right, and it bridges the time span between when you can say, good, come back and get your primary. Okay, so the bridge, quite simply, is information about what's done right. Maybe what's done right equals tolerating a stimulus like a needle touching you. Maybe it's spinning in a circle really fast. Whatever is done right could be many, many different things. But you use this tool to pinpoint an exact moment when that animal has done whatever you wanted them to do, or a step towards whatever you want them to do. And it also tells them that the primary reinforcer is complete. So you've made a deal with the animal that when you hear this sound, you're going to get a bit of food or some sort of reinforcement. It is important that they have some sort of reinforcement that is associated with the bridge. We'll talk about in a little bit. It doesn't necessarily always have to be food, but usually I use food. Okay, I already said it pinpoints an exact moment. Mechanical versus verbal bridge. I think for the most part here we're starting to move more and more towards mechanical bridges, which is super great in my opinion. I see, as a consultant, I see that people generally have much better timing when they use either a whistle or a clicker. There are some very good trainers, don't get me wrong, there are very good trainers who can use the word good, but it just seems in general that more people have better timing with a whistle or a clicker. Also, just put everything up there. Also, the mechanical bridge, sounds essentially the same no matter who makes it. Our voices are all a little bit different, and consistency is an important part of training. So we want to try to be very consistent in what we do with the animals. The mechanical bridge occurs only in the context of positive reinforcement training, whereas the animals may hear your voice all the time. And so overwhelmingly, I just see that it is such a powerful, it becomes a very powerful tool and an amazing way to communicate with animals. I mean, it gets their attention and they, turn and look and kind of, ooh, what did I do? And how do I do it again? If they're not quite sure what they've done, if they're in the process of learning. But even when they're a well-established trainee, it still is an extremely helpful and I think important tool and a very powerful way to communicate. Okay, and just to finish up before we break for lunch, does everybody have a clicker? Okay, so when you're training, when you give the food, doesn't matter. Get it in your head. Doesn't matter when you give the food. If you've done an excellent job of training the whistle or the clicker. So if you've associated that sound with the food, then that sound becomes food's coming, right? So now it's your way to say, good. At that exact moment, something happened. Something good happened. So you have to get really good with your timing of your clicker or your whistle. Most new trainers, because we're just building our confidence when we're new and we're a little bit unsure, most new trainers will be ever so slightly late with their bridge. Because your brain's kind of thinking, oh, I should bridge now. Bridge. And so you may have missed the moment depending on the behavior. So it's important that you're comfortable with the tool and you kind of understand how it works. So what I want to do is, whoa, this could be a little bit of a loose cannon. It's a baboon toy. I'm going to bounce this ball and I want you all to click when it hits the floor. Okay? Do you want, where should I move? All right, maybe on the table. Oh my gosh, y'all are good. Excellent. All right. Can you go? Just stop hearing it. What? Got these holes in it that makes it a little. All right. So, you know, if you're using a whistle or a clicker, just make sure that you're really comfortable with how it works. It's always funny to me with clickers. Whenever somebody's training, you hear. That means I wish I hadn't bridged. Did they notice? We all do it. It's just very funny to me. But clickers exist in lots of different forms. This is my little cricket clicker. Very quiet. There's a couple of different types that we had here at the zoo. And they make, you know, kind of different sounds. There's also one that I've seen that you can, or I have, I didn't bring it, that you can dial in the loudness so you can make it sound soft. It's actually a pretty big clicker, I think, because of the dialing mechanism. But, you know, there's lots of different types of clickers, and I hear people say, oh, the animal's afraid of the clicker, I can't use it. One of the easy things to do is just put it in your pocket. And you can, well, perhaps I should have thicker pockets on. But you can muffle the sound somewhat with your pocket. You can also use these little guys that come from dime stores or whatever. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of muffle the sound of the clicker if an animal's afraid of it. Sorry, let me just take a look and see where would be a good place to stop. Whoa, that's big. Okay, I think let's go ahead and just stop for lunch here. And then when we come back after lunch at 12:30, we'll finish talking about the bridge and then talk a little bit, very briefly about targets and then some of the reasons why we train animals. Oh, I'm sorry, why we train animals is tomorrow. We'll talk just very briefly about targets. So yeah, we'll be back 12:30 to 1:30. Oh, you're good. I know, I heard.
Yeah. So, strong feeling like you can turn it back on.
Hold, stood straight up and Darren was like, "Hey, what are you doing there?" And then the work, so she was understanding that it's
Well, thank you.
No, that's on that road.
I think I finally, so the little heat pad stopped working. But we took that out, so the heat pad is now with the silicone cable. Front.
Yes, they do.
And then the back can like,
Oh, okay.
so it's a different gradient. So like at
Coastal town, right near Hearst Castle, it starts with a C
there.
Okay.
And then,
Okay. And does it still give you 120 on the front?
no, it's like 140.
What is this? But they found videos that you guys put up. Okay, good. So I'm not just like,
They were fine
This is the
though.
same people that call it Janet, that call it Tondo, Janet, it's called Tano. Why do you say it that way? It's weird.
so, yes, they're giving you Homebrew. But Cambria, which is
People that live there are very anxious about that.
I knew someone who had their second, was a professor there, and he was second class was there, and came
Yeah,
called
what the-
Cambria, so I'm never gonna be able to.
How long ago did you say
call it
5 to
Cambria,
7
I'm
days?
sorry.
Was that like 5 days
They
ago?
live there, they get to decide how it's pronounced. Somebody else does.
So Alicia and I were like, oh, Cambria, and so, Cambria and the ladies
No,
are.
we're not. We're not.
Down where they were
I
from,
mean, I'm not giving them money.
and then some home.
Good. What are you doing?
My next thing. Just for the list, like, stay after time.
No, and this is why we're upset about it. This is why we're not excited about it.
There's an hour and a half to do, it's another solve or something to do is here to recognize the learning.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was asking about going.
It's fine.
We have 5 hours now.
We voted on it, so I did not vote for her.
That's right, here,
Talk to
Frank
Sam.
came over.
Sam. So yeah, we just have to last week.
All he did was give us and, well, because I'm not looking at, he did that, and the light didn't turn on, so we thought it was on the start, and I was like looking at the actual, like, box in the back. And, but if you flip the switch off, yeah, that's really, but
And it would just show. And so that sounds like we're hoping for multiple notes, so it means they're not showing a lot. And then have a star, since right now we're showing.
I don't know if we'll ever be able to give up the
And so it's basically, I think once they're not systematic,
thinking around, those are steps, figure it out.
they're sort of kind of gonna call it this.
But we
Or,
like,
but while
together
they're
and like
being
make it and screen better and a little less ghetto, more ghetto fabulous. Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you, Lord. Sorry,
And one of the boys was working, training us for like 2 or 3 times a week. Third or fourth section, he'll be like, God, the difference. Like that I would ask him for one of them, he'd start to raise the one up, and I'd be like, to that point, I was like,
the wheels turning.
oh my God, I love you so much.
That's cool.
Crazy stuff. One person on there, one more and then it was like, take the circle and repeat sentences all day. We like brought the time down, so we do have the time. People up there to
Just with the moms for so long, they'll probably be really receptive to training for quite some time. I guess like, they're
like mom should be like in the one stall, and let's not be with her at all, and be like sort of closed door, and she'll like know that the door is closed, and I'll look at it,
There's
and
a
then
tiny
like,
house that lives
she's like, you have to
next door.
out of the It's like, I could be taking your friends away right now.
wow.
So no, she's just the most broken, it's like, there's no longer if you're not
There's a church
Yeah, apparently she had started getting in the habit of racing into the parties. She started learning how to get levers around the windows on the cars. She's way too young. She, like the second day, was like, they did both all of our windows in the back, all we had was cable, and she was like, we closed it, and she was like, staring up it, and like, messed up the cable, she like, climbed up the thing. And it was just like, she was trying to figure it out. Yeah, she knows how to do it.
That's cool. That's sweet, man. I hear about you're really smart. Hear that anecdotes about Black Widow being smart. You know, they are, but
That's what's going on. It's not crazy because I can't sanitize it. I can't get it. So right now they're getting like crap from the market. So we're going home. because I can.
So cool. So cool.
I'm loving it. It's just.
Try for the blog.
And it sounds like it's, the carnivores can't get it in their gut because they eat herbivores.
There's no
I just want them to eat so They're really beautiful. The boys
Just gotta decorate it.
every single one of them is like, you know, each other.
all their stuff's in there.
Well, one's purple, the other one's like, onto the next 6 years, and just like work out with each other. You're like, like, I don't need bloody ears or bloody necks, like, but, what those people do with them, see them, I hope them. Holy cow.
Yeah, it's like the construction of the Bear area.
I guess it's gonna be hilarious. So they make sure to take that area up on it, and then sure to get it full, and then our pauses. That's what's gonna be the irony, is that we're really like, oh yeah, they're gonna be here forever, because they start keeping it forever, and then it will probably. I don't know.
I'll check the outside.
Winning! Somebody finally chose one of those cards. Yeah, good choices. You're not staying awake over there.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah.
You fall in front of the couch. Like almost like during work. Scoots along. And then you see what?
So I'll leave it. Real quick, like, oh my god.
Where is this line?
I literally put my head right and then all of a sudden, David was like, God, I felt something. Yeah.
And so it's like, cool, busy time. So it's not.
Yeah.
We just don't have the number of calls. Because we can't get in.
It was just like, but it was a lot bigger.
Two installs. So they're not big pushback over. No, even the one side.
We usually do a half hour break.
Clean one side. It's not like big and
And then you
kind of big and big that.
They're always usually dinner for break or
I smell draft.
No,
No, it's okay. I was just like, I feel it. I'm sorry. I'm on the way.
Yeah, I was
And we walked. I was walking on the street one day, and she's like, what's that smell? And we're all like, it's draft us.
Have you seen her girl in the dark?
I like, no, what's the first couple days where it feels like?
She will go under the bottom. The Spanish will go over and she'll like test it. See how they're released. She'll like, and she knows which one has the worst reviews.
Just took a while.
Yesterday. Yesterday, after Alva had refilled the toothbrush, put it in upside down. So I went in to turn it Right, so there was still some IVs left over from she didn't. As I was picking him out, and she comes over, and I was crashing through the car.
Yeah.
So, please put her head through, and he's like, no, you're not gonna go in, trying to find out.
What name, what person are we using?
I would
Our
say-
half name or you're using?
I mean, you know, it's just, I'm gonna say it.
Yes, that's the actual stuff. I feel that's not, I like saw it and I was like, let's come check this out.
One of those is like,
Correct, yes. Looking at, yeah, like there, I
Right now, I think we're only gonna try and get him with Donna. Because it's just them, they're separated over. Yeah, actually, I don't think. Yeah. I just stand next to him without a barrier. She'd be the one.
but what we're doing early range are making chocolate with salted caramel but she's gonna make like little cookies and then have like but she's like
Like putting a leg chain on, so you sit up like feeling.
I'm not handy. Especially on top of that, it's far away. So, so it's just, is it really bad? So she just has all these under air breath. Or like, the other ones are like 600. An elephant. So, like, you saw, and it's I know you saw some that were. Some can take a while, like, better just like beautiful and what's the difference? Yeah. It's a neighborhood, I think, like the amount of land and all.
It's just like when I went up there, I think.
So, like that one that was like, it was like, it would be something that I know, like, see you and your house, like, it was so fun, like, that backyard, like, it had all of these little, cute, like, backyard area, and the garden here, and the little, like, it had this, like, really random bamboo, like, I'm sure it was, like, I'm like, trying to but, you know, like, you're kind of inside, like, so, I mean, exactly, I saw it and I'm like, all this kind of work, why was I going back to the monster here? So, but other than that, it was just, it was so much of it's one thing to consider like organic, it's not an impact in like maybe like make repairs every year or something, like landscaping and applying
I mean, so it's like, last Thursday, right?
Well, about that time, weren't they, well, they, it wasn't that, but they're gonna reboot the system or something like that.
I don't know, but this was like, this is, it's happened those 4 times. It's like very intermittent. That's where I'm messaging him right now. It's very intermittent.
You ever see me with like
And then we get tons of emails from the team, and even on the same day, Eric was like, your open email's broken. It's not, I got emails. So,
Yeah, it's so funny to be like, we debate with each other who has a cooler job. Like, our kids, like, but yeah, he works for PlayStation. Cooler. And then I think he like at like 10, you know, something like we have the same dynamic. I was like, talking about my job. I was like, yeah, cooler job. Yeah. He's talking to you about my job. Oh, yeah, you gotta go like that. Otherwise, you can kind of go like whoosh.
We're gonna change my address again for USPS. We're gonna change my
every time, but like, for example, the big straw bed, always peas and sweaty cars. Yeah, so it breaks up, but I'm hoping like it lifts up the straw bed and breaks through, so sometimes it pees on that bed as well, and so underneath gets wet, so I'll like lift it up, break out any of the wet straw in there, and last time I did like, a lot of the wet dirt.
Really?
Was like, no, I know where the straw bed was, so I moved the whole straw bed away so that underneath there is so usually the straw works like
You see those videos of the little baby hippo?
I'll leave later.
Where
Oh yeah, so
someplace
if
far away.
we need more straw, then I
So
can
cute though.
Never watched it.
Ridiculous.
Oh my god, like I
Put on a t-shirt or get like the blouses or whatever when they were playing basketball.
yeah,
Shirts or
yeah,
blouses.
she's just such a junkie.
yeah, so we should get straw.
There's one thing.
But even some of
The one that got us out a lot, but most of the time we got and then everyone's going to play with that ball, and that's really
You gotta have an underwater big landscape.
very old.
I was there back in June. I didn't know where I
Now he's got like a run, so he's another yard.
Yeah.
That's it from my husband. I was trying to so I got there on the
I think we have it on
their polar bear the wolves, then there's snow leopards, cats, fishing Or at least like she likes also dig during the day, so she has recently done this whole
I haven't.
and she
I might.
You guys, it's like, go, go,
Here for the Wednesday that she.
very no. And so I was just frustrated all the time. So sent our everything all around all day.
Then we're good.
He's just who's taking this?
With her about the concerns issue, like, best way to, see if I'm good for you guys, or you guys are good for me. She's willing to come out and take things. Do it.
It smells like skunk spray. Okay. Like, there's like, oh, it's pretty cool, and then you touch one of your it was so yeah, they're pretty cool strains. That's the thing, they have like their whole as needed system, and as needed can't be reliant on
And
if
if you want to share this, we're recording, right? I'm not trying to record everybody, I just didn't want to send it out for you before and then have
and then whatever all the rest of the
regulars
at.
But if you want to share, just talk about
Oh.
the options during streaming or something like that.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry. Good.
Good. Yeah, no, I want to give you.
Actually, I ate that already. What?
No, I haven't. They were very kind.
Oh, it's so
And
good.
for like 6 days over the course of 2 months, like keep that.
The buzzing. What are you doing?
And so I have 5 servers.
See, lunch catered.
Where is, what's it on?
Not catered, it's not a food.
Yeah, where is that?
So,
Oh, they have it.
They're getting back there.
yeah, and it's about doing a lot of stuff after 10 o'clock. Feel free to go find that.
But that's like, they were So I never got added on mailing list. So if you type some categories,
No one else.
Alrighty, so we'll get started again.
I think she wasn't gonna do it.
Chatty Cathy's in the back. Alright, sorry. I'm trying to stand. It's a little toasty in here, I thought it was just me. Okay. So continuing on our discussion about the bridge. I know we've talked about this before in previous discussions, but I just want to sort of give you a little reminder about how the bridge can be used. Remember, it's simply a way to say good. It really shouldn't indicate that the behavior is finished and that the animal can break position, but oftentimes the bridge does coincide with the end of the behavior. But really, that is not your signal to the animal the behavior's done. There are many other things that happen in conjunction with the end of the behavior. Maybe you have a verbal release like okay or all right. You might change your position if you're holding a cue. You might take your cue down. You might ask the animal to do another behavior. There are a number of different things that indicate to the animal that the behavior is finished. And I would really suggest that if you're not using the bridge throughout a behavior, that you begin to use it this way, because it can be very helpful, especially for behaviors that have quite a long duration, like a blood draw or some behavior that has many, many parts to it. And you want to be able to tell the animal good throughout the behavior, but you don't want that bridge to signal to them that the behavior's done. You know, when you put a needle in an animal, it's a great time to say, good for holding still while I stuck this needle in your arm. But certainly they shouldn't break position and move, or that could hurt them and not be very good for the final behavior of injecting something or withdrawing blood. So it allows you to give information throughout a behavior, not just at the end. So it can become a very helpful tool that allows you to communicate to the animals throughout the behavior. And because you've paired that bridge with primary reinforcement, you're really delivering reinforcement simply by blowing the whistle. Of course, you can't only blow the whistle a lot of times or without providing reinforcement primary reinforcement along with it, or it'll be devalued. But there are other types of reinforcers that you can use along with the bridge. Maybe your voice for encouragement, maybe you can scratch the animal a little bit, do other things that also will provide that reinforcement. So here's just, I think some of you have seen this video, but I just want to show you again just an example of using a bridge throughout the behavior. And I will say there are some behaviors where it's actually disruptive to use a primary reinforcer throughout a behavior. Semen collection is one that often comes to my mind. We were training a whole bunch of chimpanzees for semen collection, and they would continue with the behavior, if you will, if you would bridge them. And for some of them, it was actually a frightening behavior when they, are in the AV and you're trying to bridge them for thrusting, and you're out to collect your sample. And if you go to give them food, well, the food, I guess, is more reinforcing than the sex they're having with the AV. So they would actually stop the behavior, and then you would have to start all over again. So we would use the bridge to tell them they were doing the right thing throughout this behavior until they had finished it, and then we could follow up with a food reinforcer. Eventually, a behavior like that sort of seems to become self-reinforcing, but honestly, in all the chimps that we trained to do it, which was a large number of them, in a laboratory setting, we were trying to train this behavior with a number of them, it wasn't really self-reinforcing until they kind of learned how to do it and what it was about. Anyway, so using the bridge throughout the behavior. So you'll see, we're going to ask for belly. He presents his belly, is bridge for that behavior. Bridge for the needle to be inserted in the skin. Bridge for the injection. And bridge for the needle coming out. So all of the components of that behavior, and this was the first time he had ever had a sub-Q injection. So all of the components of that behavior are bridged, but they're not all followed up with a food reinforcer. But he's still getting information throughout that behavior about what he's doing correctly. Another example. This is building duration of an open mouth for a rhino. And you can hear she uses the verbal release, all right, which is commonly used in elephant training to indicate to the rhino that she's done with that behavior. So those are just a couple of quick examples. One of the things that we'll be doing throughout this week is playing the training game. And when we play the training game that I'm referring to, there's probably a lot of different versions, but the purpose of this training game is really to understand the timing of the bridge and And so when we play the training game, we have one person who's an animal and one person who's a trainer. And if we're playing in a group of people, like we're going to do in just a moment, when we're playing in a group of people, if I'm the trainer, then I and the rest of you know what the behavior is. And the animal goes outside, we all talk about the behavior, and the animal obviously doesn't know the behavior. They come back inside. We use only the clicker or the whistle to communicate to the animal what they're doing correctly as they move towards the final behavior. So this game is really great for learning how important the timing of your bridge is, because if I want the animal to pick up this mouse, if I want the animal to pick up the mouse and the animal goes, and I bridge here, I've just said yes for being here, when I really wanted to say yes for either coming towards that or actually touching it. So timing of your bridge is critical. The food's going to follow. The timing of the food isn't important. So when we play the training game, as the trainer, you get to experience how it is to use the bridge as your sole means of communication. There's no talking, no pointing, no like, look, that's what it is right there, and if you're watching the game, you don't go, when the person misses the bridge. You will all miss the bridge. It happens. It's no big deal. You can fix it. But for the purposes of the training game, we limit all communication except the clicker. And as the animal, I think it's really important that anyone who's training animals play this game and be the animal, because you gain a whole new level of empathy for that animal and what it's like as this person tries to teach you what to do, and you have no idea what you're supposed to do, and they're using this crazy little clicker, and maybe at some point they're using these other things to poke at you and get you to move in a particular direction. You really have no idea. So when you play the game, you get this level of empathy for the animal, and I think it helps make you a much better trainer, because now you're a little bit more aware of maybe what the animal's experiencing and how that frustration feels. You're like, I'm trying, but I'm not getting anything for it. So I think it really helps you a lot. So we have these opportunities throughout the week for people to play this game. And I mean, it is a fun game. It's a fun way to learn about using the clicker and how important, or the whistle, and how important the timing of that is, as well as learning what it's like to be the animal. But it's also an important, I think, step as you're beginning to develop your skills as not only a trainer of established behaviors, but also somebody who's going to train new behaviors from start to finish. Because all behavior is made up of lots and lots of little steps. And you have to think about those steps when you play the game. So it sort of helps you begin to wrap your head around what it's like to write a shaping plan or a plan to train a behavior from start to finish. So what I was hoping we could do is play at least one round of the training game now, just so that everybody can kind of see what it's about. And then I would recommend that you take advantage of one of the times during the rest of the week to come back and play again, and then you can do both, the trainer and the animal. So, anybody want to raise your hand and volunteer? If you've played before, you're probably a good guinea pig to play in front of the whole crowd, because you do feel a little weird doing it in front of the whole crowd. I've been there before. All right, excellent. You want to be the animal?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. The only reason that I said that is because, I forgot your name.
Sarah.
Sarah came to play the training game the other day, and she should get lots of kudos. Pass her some treats.
It's okay, I can eat this.
She was the trainer, and I said, you might want to play the other side next time you do. So she's going to be the animal this time. Does anyone want to be her trainer? We'll be kind. If you volunteer first, we're nice to you. If you wait, it just gets harder. Those who are avoiding eye contact are often selected. Okay, so Sarah, will you just go wait outside for a sec? And what we'll do is our animal will enter the room and be sort of active, and that's going to give you your starting point.
Okay.
Okay? So once she's outside, we can talk about her.
Oh my God.
I'm just kidding. So she can
You're all, oh my God.
anything or anyone in the room. You can have her, touch her hands to her head, stand on one leg, spin around in circles, pick something up, give me a massage, give me a massage. Anything is acceptable. Give me a massage.
How about like picking up a chair?
Hello, am I not a good communicator?
I don't know, I don't want to make it too hard for her.
Okay, so pick up a chair.
Yeah. Sure.
Is there an available chair?
How about that chair?
Okay, and how do you want her? Again, doesn't matter what you do for the game, but in the effort to start thinking about behaviors made up of lots of little steps, you want to think about how you want her to pick it up. Is she going to be this way, or this way, or one-handed, top from the bottom, top from the bottom?
Flip it upside
No,
down.
pick it up and
Pick it up
then
and flip it upside down.
and then sit in it.
Maybe I'll pick it up and like bring it.
Bring it to you
Yeah.
and set it down, or
Sure.
hold it.
Or set it down.
Okay, which one?
The one that's not missing the back piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one that's empty.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. And which orientation? This way.
Yeah, that way. Just like from behind.
Okay. Pick up
Pick
here.
it up. So come
Okay.
right here. Set it down. Okay.
All right. So right when she walks in the room, you can begin bridging. And if any of you haven't seen, who has not seen this game played before? Okay. Most people have. So it's kind of like the hot and cold game. Have you played before?
Yeah, I've done it a couple times with
Okay, it's kind of like the hot and cold game, you're getting warmer, so you can think of it that way. But the minute that she enters our enclosure, the game begins. So you can start bridging. with the training game, use the clicker a lot, especially for movement. With an animal, you're not going to be clicking quite that frequently. It's effective for the training game. One thing that didn't happen, I was kind of waiting for it to, but I think because it was such a short distance, it didn't happen. Sometimes what we'll see is somebody gets in the habit of sort of clicking very regularly and predictably, and then when you need to make a small modification, because you've had this very predictable schedule of reinforcement, and then you try to work out of that high predictability, it can be sometimes challenging. And it didn't, I think if we'd had her, walking around in circles or going out the back door or something, it may have happened. But just be aware of that when in the game, you're going to probably use the clicker much more the way we just saw it, which is highly effective for the game, other than if you get really click, click, click. So it's really predictable and you're not paying attention to very specific things that you bridge. But with an animal, you're not going to be bridging quite like that because you'll have other tools available. You'll have a target and you'll be giving food and things like that that'll break it up a little bit. We can probably take another few minutes and play again if somebody else wants the opportunity. We also, like I said, have several opportunities throughout the week. Anybody want to play? One more, real quick. Do you want me to take you? Come on, I had to pick the people in China just a
I'll be
couple
an
weeks ago.
animal.
Okay, yeah. Take some reinforcers. It's funny, most people don't want to volunteer to be the animal. Anybody want to train? It's best to keep eye contact. Do you have a clicker, or do you want this one?
Oh, there's some right here.
Okay, do you have an idea of the
I don't. Let's decide as a group.
I like to hear one.
But put Lucas's hat on his head.
Like a big cricket out of Okay. Which one's harder, the hat or the drinking?
Decide.
I always try.
Maybe she just walks in and starts giving him a
Drinking would be harder because it's a hat you're already gonna associate with putting it on someone's head.
It says drinking, you want to get that.
She can pick it
on
up.
her head.
She can pick it up, walk it over to the sink and toss it out.
Now?
Once you have it, like the glass on the thing and.
Okay, yeah, put it in the fridge.
Okay, so the
Put it in the fridge? No, no. She
I feel like we should get some chocolate.
It's me.
Oh,
I was right, that was.
Or is it?
Oh, thank you. Got a lot of them.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
excellent. doing a great job. I don't think we're frustrating the animals too much, but did either of the animals have any, like, were you
Yeah,
having, did you feel frustration?
a little bit,
Yeah.
not exaggerated.
At what point?
When I was over here and I picked this up and then I didn't know where to go or what to do with this thing, then I was like, okay, I know she wants me to get this, but what do I do with it?
You have to experiment a little bit more
Yeah.
than maybe your tolerance level. Some animals have a really short threshold for, a narrow threshold for frustration, right? And so you have to give them lots and lots of reinforcement, and maybe those are the animals that you have to break your behavior down into 15 steps instead of 10, like for an animal that might have a higher threshold for frustration and can kind of take bigger leaps.
Do you think it affects them, like, I felt when I was an animal, I feel like everyone's watching me. And do you think it affects the animal too when you're like, obviously you have to watch them to train them, but, or if there's somebody else in there, does it affect them that, like, you're standing there waiting and do something and they're like, I don't know what to do, what else do I do? Like,
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and a couple of different things come to mind with that question. One is, you know, with animals, we're going to be directing them with targets and using our food reinforcers and our variety of food reinforcers to let them know, yes, this was great, or this was pretty good. So we're going to have more tools available to us to communicate with them. But for an animal that maybe isn't that comfortable interacting with people, yeah, that could certainly be an issue. An animal like a primate where staring at them, maybe you're not talking, yeah, that's a threat, right? So if they don't perceive that you're communicating to them, it's fine if I look you in the eye and we're talking. The minute I cut off communication, then it becomes a threat. So if the animal doesn't perceive that you're communicating because they haven't learned the game yet, then that might make them uncomfortable. And then I think that flip side of that is, you know, and again, Krista Baboon that we've just been talking about, she's a very subordinate animal in the group, and it's difficult for her to come up when she's the focus. We're going to talk about you now. Okay, come on up. And all the other baboons are staring at her, and she's scared to take a piece of food because she might get attacked for doing that. So I think there could be a number of factors that would put attention on that animal that might make them feel uncomfortable. And so we want to know all of our options for dealing with that animal's discomfort. If it's fear of me, I might use one technique. If it's fear of another animal, I might use another technique. Any comments from the trainers? Did you feel like you missed any bridges, or you wish you had done something different?
I wish I didn't bridge when she had her hand on her head. She kept touching everyone's head. And I'm like, damn it! It was Frenzy's head, not his head. Yeah.
Yeah, monkeys want to touch everything.
There was definitely like a moment where I was like, I'm unsure if I should, and then you like click and you're like, shh, I didn't want to do that. So.
And I mean, that's great that you didn't walk away going, yeah, I did it perfectly. I wouldn't change a thing, because I don't think I've ever been in a training situation where I felt like I did it perfectly and wouldn't change a thing. You know, you're always, to me, that's one of the exciting things about training, is you're always problem solving and always kind of figuring out how to help the animal succeed. And so you're working through this stuff in your head all the time, and like, hindsight's 20/20. Wish I'd taken it that direction. So maybe next time you train the behavior, you'll tweak your shaping plan a little bit. So that's kind of the point of the game. I hope that if you, excuse me, I hope you can come to one of the sessions that we have set aside. But if not, you know, it's a great game to play with your colleagues in your work area, at the bar, whatever. All right. Again, I'm sorry, I forgot. How many of you have seen this slide? We're at the presentation where we talked about bridging, bribing. It was the all about the food presentation when I was here in May. Can you just, again, show me your hands if you were here? Okay, and then for the other half of my brain, if you weren't here. It's about 50-50. Okay, well, for those of you that have seen this just shortly ago, I apologize, but maybe a different bit of it will sink in. But since it is about half of you that haven't seen it, I'm going to go ahead and run through this. So, you know, as trainers, we're constantly making decisions that we think are going to help the animal be successful, right? And part of that decision, and a really important part, is when do we bridge and when do we give food and what type of food do we give and how much, and all of these decisions we make around this thing that is super important to the animals, and that's receiving the reinforcement, usually food. So these are general rules. As a general rule, each correct behavioral response should be bridged, because you want to tell the animal, good, you did that right, or you tolerated that scary thing, or whatever it might be. You want to bridge every correct behavioral response. At that point, you decide, am I going to give primary reinforcement? Am I going to give secondary reinforcement? When will I give it? How much will it be? And those are really important decisions to the animal, and they help them learn. And only through repetition and consistency of how you approach this training will they become, very solid in those behaviors. So these are really important decisions that we make. Most of the time, a more difficult behavior receives a higher value reinforcer, either quantity or yumminess, right? And a easier behavior, maybe one that's very well established, the animal performs it routinely, there's no external stimuli that would make an easy behavior difficult in that moment. You're going to still give them something. You're still going to bridge, and you may provide them with a food reward, but you're not going to give them maybe the highest value of food. So you have to make that decision. I think that some people are often confused, well, do I follow every single bridge with food, or is it okay to bridge a couple of behaviors in a row and not give food? And I think my answer is there is no exact answer, because as much as we may want to write a cookbook for training, it's very much in the moment dynamic. You're making decisions based on your knowledge of that individual animal, of the behavior, and of the situation. I will tell you, most of the time, I function in a continuous schedule of reinforcement. Every bridge gets a bit of food. Every bridge should get some type of reinforcement, otherwise the bridge will lose its value, right? So how you make those decisions is going to be based on your experience and your knowledge of the individual animal. And if I'm a new trainer to an animal, I might tend to use some higher value of reinforcement, and certainly going to provide the reinforcement for most every bridge. Although, like I gave you with the semen collection example, there are times where delivering the food reinforcer can be disruptive. Another example would be if you have an animal turned away from you or working at a distance, and you go to throw the piece of food to them, and the food bounces all over the place, and then it completely pulls them away from the behavior, and maybe you weren't ready for the behavior to end. It could be problematic then. So I think you have to gauge each situation. But I don't think there is I don't use a hard, fast rule that every bridge absolutely must be reinforced with a primary, because you do have other things available to you. Oftentimes we will make a mistake with our bridge, like we were just talking about, if you feel like you bridged too early or too late, or, like I said, I love the clicker. So you wait a second. Right, because you really wish you hadn't bridged. With your whistle, you can't take it back. So if you bridge and you go, oh, wish I hadn't done that, simply don't follow it with food. Because if you follow it with food, you're just telling the animal that indeed that was what I wanted you to do, when really it wasn't, and it was your mistake. So oftentimes an easy solution to that, or an easy response, is, okay, just come do a nice simple target, bridge, here's your treat. Forget about that other bridge that I did when I didn't pay you for it. I mean, you're not going to ruin the animal or make them mad if it's only happening every now and again. Behavior is very flexible, and animals are incredibly forgiving. So we can work through those problems. I've said most of this. Did everybody say? I think I've said most of those points. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that? So I mentioned schedules of reinforcement earlier. There are many schedules of reinforcement if you look in the operant conditioning literature. But really 2 of them are important for you to kind of understand and be able to use if you want to. Schedules of reinforcement guide us in when we give the food or the reinforcement. And all correct behaviors should be bridged. But again, when you decide to follow up with primary or secondary reinforcer is going to dictate the schedule. So the 2 schedules I would suggest you become familiar with are a continuous schedule of reinforcement and a variable schedule of reinforcement. A continuous schedule is following each correct behavioral response with that primary reinforcer. And oftentimes these are used when you're training a new behavior or a scary behavior or maybe a behavior that's been deemed particularly important. And I also will tell you that most of the time I function with a continuous schedule of reinforcement. But I really like to have a variety of reinforcers. So I don't want to go out with just a bucket of bananas. I want to have carrots and apples and bananas and maybe cooked sweet potatoes because they're super yummy. I mean, I always want to be prepared to jackpot, and I want to be prepared to reinforce behavior that's done well but is pretty easy. So variety, variety, variety. I just can't encourage you enough to diversify what's in your bucket of treats. And if you're working with an animal that maybe doesn't eat a lot of different types of food, then consider the size of the food that you're using. You can cut different pieces, different size pieces. So here's just a couple of examples of continuous schedules. You'll hear each bridge is given a bit of food.
Target. Good. Long hand. Good. Very good.
Cute. She's using a clicker. It's just learning to sit. So that got 2 pieces. And just one more.
Target. Patient.
Okay, so I think you get the idea of the continuous schedule of reinforcement. Now the variable schedule, there are a lot of different types of variable schedules, but I think from a practical point of view, if you just think of a variable schedule as delivering the primary reinforcement on a relatively random basis. So you may ask for 2 behaviors in a row that get a food treat, you may ask for 2 and then the third one gets a treat, but you're mixing it up. So this is the variable schedule. And the idea behind the variable schedule is it kind of keeps the animal guessing when they're going to get the food, and so they're always trying hard because they never quite know when they're going to get it. And again, there's lots of different opinions. I mean, I think you can get a bunch of trainers in the room and they're all going to have very different opinions about some things, and schedules of reinforcement are probably one of those things. If you read Don't Shoot the Dog, you'll see that one of the discussion points is when you're training a new behavior, you should put, if you've got 10 steps in your behavior, you want to move from step 5 to step 6, you need to put step 5 on a variable schedule before moving to step 6. Honestly, that's not something that I've ever purposefully tried to do or really needed to do. So like I said, I usually use a continuous schedule of reinforcement, but you know, sometimes I might ask an animal to target, and then give a treat. But I'm not really purposefully going out to establish a variable schedule unless there's some specific reason. But I like to have that variety of reinforcers to kind of mix things up within the context of the continuous schedule.
So you know, we talked this morning with Luana and how she's very, as soon as she hears that bridge, she's looking for the food. Is that something that maybe it would be better if she was more on a variable, where she's not always like, as soon as I hear that bridge, I'm gonna get food? But would it be more beneficial for her to be on more of a variable schedule?
It might be, you know, we have to be really careful in how we move towards that so that we don't frustrate her. And it might be, yeah, that she can hear, like, learn to have a click and then another click and then she gets the treat. So yeah, that might be something that would really help her. Yeah. So that's one of those things I would probably focus on, just because at this point the bridge has indicated the end of behaviors. So she immediately, for those of you who don't know, she's one of the little cute little bears, and she'll, you know, touch the target and immediately here's the bridge and looks back for the treat. She's just starting to do a lean in, present her side, and then turns out of the position. So it makes it very difficult to build duration if she's immediately bouncing back to facing the trainer to get the food. So how we go about that might be teaching her to just to stay on a target longer, or to accept multiple bridges to help her hold a position for duration. And it may be that's something we use right in the beginning of the behavior, and then we can begin to reduce it. It also might be, you know, another, now I'm just thinking out loud, but another option for that might be to change the way the food is delivered. You know, if she's getting juice or honey water or something like that that you can give while she stays in position, so she doesn't have to break position and pick up the food off the floor. So there are a number of different ways we can resolve that issue.
If you're training her to stay on the target longer, do you, like, would you just wait and click at the end of when you want her to be done staying on the target, or is there like an intermediate bridge or something?
You can do it both ways. Either way. That's, again, the beauty of training is it is very flexible and dynamic. But to me, it really, I'm going to gauge the individual animal, and it might be that I need to say target. They touch the target. Stay. You know, get 2 quick bridges in, so that then I can start expanding. And then it would be more like what you saw with the chimp, where we say belly, bridge, pull the skin up, bridge, put the needle in, bridge. Because now I can say good throughout the behavior, whereas if they are immediately jumping out of that position, you don't really have the ability to use it that way. So if you haven't started from the get-go using the bridge that way, you kind of have to go back and retrain it. And teaching the stay with multiple bridges can be a way to do that. Some animals, you know, there's always, I'll say, yes, this is one way you can do it. And then there was that one time where it didn't work that way. I mean, seems like that's how it often is. This one animal we were working with trying to use the bridge throughout the behavior, and it just seemed like a struggle. So we ended up just waiting till the end, and that worked great for her. So yeah, that's where I kind of say, like, know all your options. I mean, as long as you're not hurting animals, I don't think there's really a wrong way. There might be quicker ways, there might be more efficient ways, but if everybody's staying safe and you're getting where you need to be, it's probably not a wrong way. And you know, that's where I think that just kind of understanding what is available to you and how you can use all these tools. And the more experience you get, then you can say, oh, well, this might work over here, but this might work for the same behavior, different animal over here. So having a good understanding, a good foundation, or a foundational understanding of what all these tools are and how you can use them will give you more options in the end, rather than trying to read a cookbook. And can I substitute coconut oil for canola oil? I don't know. I like to cook too. And I'm experimenting with coconut oil. All right. Variable schedule. The whistle's hard to hear. Can y'all hear it? She has good timing with her bridge, though. She's experienced. So obviously the animal is not jumping up to get food every time she hears the bridge.
Does she always get the food when she's on that station?
No. So again, each behavior is bridged. Not everyone gets a giant spoon of peanut butter. Okay, and I've kind of already touched on this already, the how much food to give, and we refer to this as the magnitude of reinforcement. So the magnitude refers to maybe the size, the quantity, the yummy factor, what those foods mean to the animal, and then you're going to use those to help you communicate when an animal's done a great job or a good job or whatever it might be. And the greatest magnitude of reinforcement is typically the jackpot or bonus, and we may have our greatest magnitude of reinforcement, maybe a box of Pop-Tarts for the lemurs. Not that that's really what's in there, but that could be the biggest value of reinforcement, the highest magnitude, but how you use it dictates whether or not it's technically a jackpot. So a jackpot or a bonus is a great value reinforcer, but it comes as a surprise to the animal, and you use it when they've maybe taken a big step in the training or just tolerated something pretty significant, and you want to say, yes, manna from heaven, you've done a great job, and you really want that animal to remember that moment. Go, whoa, what'd I do, and how do I do it again to get that surprise that just dropped in my lap? So the jackpot, it's not something that always comes at the end of every single session. If you want to end your session by giving the animal a nice bit of food, they've had a good session, you want to leave them happy. You're going to give them a magnitude, but it's not necessarily a jackpot. So a jackpot we use with the purpose of surprising the animal, and it comes at that moment when they've done something that was very significant. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm actually going to move past the reinforcement and bribe because we talked about this so much last time. And we also talked about targets a lot. So I'm going to move past this. You can just enjoy the lovely pictures. I threw a lot of stuff in here because I wasn't sure what we would have time for or who would have been here from previous talks. Oh, one thing, I think that we've talked a lot about the A to B behavior, but I just want to mention this is a very helpful behavior, and it's different than a come here. With an A to a B behavior, we should be able to tell the animal go, go, or go, and they are responding to the cue of leave me and go in a particular direction, and they turn and they look for the B point. And it's not, I turn my back on the animal or withdraw their opportunity to earn positive reinforcement so that I'm sort of cutting them off, and then they go and look for something else. they're actually responding to a cue, and you can teach them to go in different directions. And then the B person would be, you know, maybe with a target there once they turn and start looking. So just to illustrate that, here's the elephant. You'll see she's going to say go, and he turns and leaves and starts heading in the direction of the point, and then the target comes out. So he goes to the B point.
Is that second trainer saying come here, or they're just silent until they get to the...
Yeah, they're not calling them unless the animal can't see the target. Whoa. So same thing with the giraffe. This animal's just learning the A to B, but you can see he's already responding to the go. And the second person picks up the bridging, and they come to the second target. And she's cueing wrong. So I try to cut it off there. We normally don't do across the body. You know, you kind of, it's much more clear if you make the cues like this or this. Okay. So I do want to just take the last few moments to remind you about the use of the second target. So, you know, for most animals, we teach them to touch either a head target, a nose target, or maybe for primates, a hand target as the first target that they learn. Once they learn to move towards this initial target, then we start to use a second or a body target. And this allows us to access all their different body parts. And for those of you who are working with large animals, it's really helpful because you can't reach their entire body, so you have these lovely things on sticks that allow you to extend your arm essentially and focus a part of their body to move in a particular direction. So the concept, and I guess the reason I'm sort of spending a bit of time on this is to kind of drive home the importance of the foundation of learning and the concept of touching your body part to this target and bring your body parts towards the target. So something called generalization happens. Once an animal learns maybe to touch their shoulder, their hip, and then when you want them to touch their knee, oh, I get this now. Okay, this is what we did before. So they begin to generalize this concept of bringing a body part towards this target. And what you'll find with many animals is that if you train a few body targets, it's super easy to train them to bring almost any body part towards a target because they understand the concept of, you know, I've taught you to bring your knee here, to bring your shoulder here. So now when I ask for your elbow, oh, yep, that seems familiar, I can do that. Because you start to understand this concept that where this thing touches, you should move that body part. So it becomes a really useful tool to access all parts of the animals. Okay, so again, just some examples. The gorilla bringing his hip into a target, the bear with the belly target, the sea lion's learning to do a flipper stand, so raising the back flippers to the target, the giraffe presenting the foot to the foot target. Unfortunately, the trainer is quite focused on the foot target because that's the new part and is not really paying much attention to the head target. But you do want to split your eyeballs, do the chameleon thing, and pay attention to both, or all aspects of the animal. So a lot of animals, we may work with body parts that they can't see. An elephant can't see their front feet when their head's up, and you know they can't look down that way. So we can use the target by touching their foot and indicating which direction they should move their foot. And this allows us to refine their movements and get some pretty, I don't know why that's on there twice. I guess I really liked it. It allows us to refine their movements and get some pretty precise movements from the animals. So again, you'll see a hand target that's being used to bring her shoulder closer. In just a second, obviously being desensitized for tactile, but there's a nice touch, move that body part here. And this is training this guy for full body tactile and hoof work. So again, just bringing the hip in to give nice good access to the feet and legs. The hip target was mainly what I wanted you to see. Even very small movements, like the elephant moving the ear backwards and forwards, touch the ear on the front, move the target away, elephant brings the target towards the ear, touch the back, target towards the, or ear moves backwards. I know that I showed you this video last time, but I think it's such an excellent example of target use that I'm going to show you again. And this is one of the hyenas here. And we were just beginning to teach open mouth. And what you'll see in the first video is if you want an animal to open its mouth, where are you going to put the targets? You're always coming towards the targets, right? So where do you put the targets? Yeah, because you have to open into them. You don't want to pry their mouth open. First off, we don't want to be forcing, shoving, pushing, pulling animals to have them do behaviors. So watch the animal's response and the target placement. Targets are kind of inside the mouth as if prying it open. And she's doing a lot of biting of the target. And then all we did was make a very small adjustment to the target position. And watch the difference. Open. So now you can see the targets are drawing the mouth open, much better open. And that was in the same session, just by making that very small adjustment. So yeah, for a fine movement like open mouth, hand targets are being used here. Target on the top for the upper lip, on the bottom for the lower lip, not prying the mouth open. And of course we use targets to teach animals to hold positions or locations, like stations. So this is Dern just beginning to learn to stay on her ball and station. So Stephanie's just asking her to stay and just beginning to stand up and move away from her just a slight bit. And you can hear the bridge happens at the point when she steps to the furthest point in this case. Okay, we can also use targets to have animals learn to hold positions, and this gets back, I think, a little bit to one of the questions earlier about how do you use the target. This elephant was actually pretty well trained on he was very well trained on the lean-in behavior, but this was his first day out in this enclosure, and he had never leaned into this wall before. So the target's left there in place to help him understand to stay leaned in.
Good boy, Nick. Lean in. That's a good boy, Nick. Lean in. Lean in.
He's a little tentative about it.
Steady, Nick. Good, steady. Good boy, Nick. Steady. Good boy.
Okay. Not similar example, but in this case, the chimpanzee has his arm in a blood sleeve, and there's a pin right here that he's holding onto. So that pin essentially becomes the target, the point of reference. He has to hold on to that pin, which puts his arm in a safe place, both for him when the needle's in his arm for blood collection, and also for the person who's reaching in to do the blood draw. Okay, so that target is the pin, and he's being asked to hold. I mean, in this case, it's literally hold on to it, but hold also means stay. Keep that position. And just one quick note on targeting for safety. Don't be between an animal and a hard place, especially with your own body parts. If something's going to get squished between a bar and an elephant, I'd much rather it be the target. This elephant is not intentionally squishing the target. She just did a nice lean in, and I had it between the bar and her. So she leaned in real hard. But we also can use targeting for safety. In this case, it was safety for equipment. The animal is being trained for an ultrasound, so we teach them to hold on to the targets so that the ultrasound equipment can be introduced, and holding on to those targets is actually an incompatible behavior. So he's holding on to the targets. If he lets go of the targets, we get the ultrasound equipment out of there. But it protects the person reaching in doing the ultrasound, it protects the expensive equipment, those sorts of things. And very much like the case with the chimpanzee holding the blood draw, when we do a blood draw from an elephant's ear, we need that elephant to hold their ear very steady. So in this case, the target is used constantly on the ear. The elephant learns they must keep their ear in contact with the target, and you'll see Jeff actually start to rub the ear a little bit. Some animals like that tactile, so you're providing a little bit of reinforcement with the target because they like that feeling of being rubbed. And this is Lisa, who does not particularly like needles and blood draw, and working up toward, this is actually her first stick with a needle, so you'll see she's going to get stuck. And she gets a big, huge jackpot because, like I said, that was an actual needle stick. Okay, so kind of in conclusion for today, please understand that target training is not something in of itself. Targets are a tool that we use to shape behavior, to teach animals to make big movements and small movements, and to hold a position or hold a location. Targets are very helpful when you're teaching new behaviors, but we also use them to cue behaviors. So target training, I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, I hope it means people are using targets to position animals, but targeting isn't the end product, right? It's just a tool that you use to achieve many, many other things. And hopefully it's associated only with positive reinforcement training. But a single target can achieve a number of different behaviors. You can teach a tiger to sit, lie down, or stand up, all with the same tool. Perhaps you, at some point, want to replace the target as the cue with some sort of hand signal. But if you need to, you can continue using the target as the cue. The only, I think, drawback of that is that it might limit you in moving forward with some other behaviors if the animal's so focused on that as a cue. But it's not at all a bad thing. It sometimes can just interfere with future objectives. So I think that's really all I wanted to get through today. And what we'll start with tomorrow are some objectives of training. And again, my purpose in that will be to show you lots of videos and pictures as examples and kind of get you thinking about maybe different objectives or different ways you can achieve objectives within your sections. So thanks so much for your patience. And we're going to play more games tomorrow.
Is the water still off?